Let's bring in criminologist Terry Goldsworthy, who spent 28 years as a detective. Terry, miracle, huh?
Yeah, it is. It's, great news 19 days on. I think it's just probably a good example of the police didn't give up hope, and they certainly put plenty of resources into it and continued the investigation, and ultimately that's paid off for them.
And just think about every officer involved in this. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them are parents and mothers and fathers themselves, so they would have felt this keenly, and the pressure to have a result and for it to turn out exactly as it has. How do you reckon those detectives would be feeling right now that Cleo's back with her parents?
Oh, look, they'd be very happy. I mean, you do get personally involved to some degree in investigations like this. Whilst you have to remain professional to ensure that when you go to court, everything is done appropriately, there is some personal involvement. So I suspect a case like this, where you have a very young victim, would have resonated with many of the detectives, and they'd be very happy with the outcome that has come through, some 2 weeks down the track.
I think it'll be fascinating to find out, what was that piece of evidence, what was that little development, what was that key piece of information from the public that was phoned in, or just something that led them to where they found her, and also what went into raiding that house at 1 o'clock in the morning. All that build-up of evidence, which will be contributing to this guy being taken into custody and questioned right now. It all lays the foundation for a significant case, right?
Yeah, look, it does. And, this investigation moved from a search and rescue type issue to a potential homicide or kidnapping investigation. And the police would have been faced with the position of moving from a low information state to a high information state. The benefit they had, I think, is that this took place in a fairly remote area, so it limited, in reality, the suspect pool for them once they determined it was looking like a kidnapping or a homicide potentially. They would have moved through the hierarchy of suspicion. They've had great media coverage. It's a very good media campaign, and that is one of the major investigative tools you can use. And technology has also played a major role in assisting the police in coming to identify the suspect. And the fact the raid took place last night at 1 o'clock, I suspect they got some information shortly before that time and acted immediately.
Mm. This is a little girl who was kidnapped as she was sleeping in her tent with her parents beside her and her little sister. I mean, how rare are abductions, Terry?
Look, they are fairly rare in terms of stranger abductions. Most abductions are done by, familial relatives, etc. So this is unusual, and I think that's what's lent itself to the, to the fascination of the wider public and also the media, in terms of the nature of the offence and also the nature of the victim, the innocence of the victim. And you see that in various crimes that go on. So, that has been, I think, a great outcome in terms of that exposure, because it would have made it very difficult for the person who had kidnapped to actually be mobile or do anything, for fear that people would recognise her if he was trying to move her.
Mm. Take us inside, if you can, the police station now. What would be, I mean, it's obviously pretty early in the morning over there, 5:15 WA time. What would be happening in terms of questioning, in terms of the investigation, but also perhaps, there's obviously got to be legal ramifications here and possibly lawyers coming into it. But what happens inside that police investigation now that there is someone in custody?
Yeah, look, the police would be trying to ascertain how Cleo came to be in the house. I guess the primary evidence they've got is they've found the child in that house. The circumstances of how she got there will now be the focus of their investigation. So they'll be trying to work back from the locating of her this morning back to her disappearance 19 days ago, and the role that person played, and I guess the role any other person may have played in the last 19 days. So let's not exclude there could be others. I mean, we don't know that yet. So they'll certainly be looking to, fill in those blank spaces and ascertain whatever evidence they need to propagate the charge later in court.
Terry, I'm sure you, like every person in this country, has been watching this case so closely since she disappeared. Did you expect this outcome?
Look, it had gone on for a little while. We talk about the golden hour in homicide investigations, basically the first 24 hours being crucially important. Once that had passed and there'd been no successful location, I've got to say I was becoming more doubtful, and certainly by the time we were getting up towards 2 weeks, I didn't hold much hope. So I think this is a great outcome, especially when you see some of those well-known international cases where children have been gone. And I guess we shouldn't forget that, you know, some children are kidnapped and are kept for their captors for years. We've seen some really unusual cases where that's happened. So it's highly unusual, but it can happen. And fortunately, in this case, it was only a matter of weeks and wasn't long term.
Everyone's like an armchair detective these days, right? And even looking at interviews, all sorts of, aspersions were cast on the parents and the stepfather and the mother, and it just went on and on for days, right? It's a lesson, isn't it, in if you're a police officer, I'm sure they watched those interviews as well, but it's not drawing too many conclusions from initial interviews with people, right?
Yeah, look, and I mean, I heard some mention of Lindy Chamberlain's case, etc. There were some similarities there in terms of how we were judgmental on Lindy Chamberlain. Look, there's a hierarchy of suspicion in these type of jobs and where you think something's happened. And by necessity, you must get a version or an account from the parents as to their activities, their involvement, etc. It just has to be done. If you don't do it, it's almost negligent not to do it. And, you know, it's not necessarily to say that, you know, you're going with tunnel vision. You shouldn't go in with tunnel vision and be biased in terms of who you think the suspect is. But there is that hierarchy of suspicion. Once you're satisfied the parents have had no role in their witnesses, and that's their only role, you can move on to other things like, you know, people in the area. In this case, you would have been looking at people who had a history of perhaps child sex offences or the likes, and moving through that hierarchy of suspicion. So it is unfortunate. You must search the parents' house. I mean, I was surprised that people were questioning why that was happening. It's just part of the course.
And Terry, how surprised were you that she was found in Carnarvon? The fact that she was taken and found so close to where she disappeared, because there was talk that has she potentially been taken overseas? Is she long gone? How unusual is it that someone would take someone and would keep them so close to the crime scene?
It is unusual, and I put that down to probably the police response. They put a lot of resources in very quickly, which is what you want to do. You don't want to be putting the resources in 3 weeks down the track. So that was effective, and I think the media coverage also would have made it very difficult for someone who was local and thought about transporting the child further away. Almost impossible for them to do, I would have thought.
Really interesting to talk to you. Your perspective on this and expertise in the field. Really interesting this morning. Appreciate your time today. Thank you. And